this. Okay, so we will get started. Thank you for everybody's patience while some people were getting logged in. And my name is Karen Alter, and Stacy and I are co-presidents of the Mercer County Jewish Genealogy Society at Bethel Synagogue. And we're thrilled to have you here on this beautiful spring-like day in March. And I will read Sandy's biography, and then I will hand it over to her, and she will start her presentation. Sandy Landman began her journey in genealogy in the late 1990s when she set out to find her biological grandmother, who'd given her late mother up for adoption in Germany in 1928. Her mission was accomplished in 5 months, inspiring her to research her roots more deeply and find living family around the world, some separated by the Holocaust. Sandy believes her experience as a news reporter in the 1970s and 1980 informs her technique and tenacity. She also has been an award-winning public relations professional in the arts, public television, and higher education. More recently, she has worked as a PR consultant in documentary film, music, and theater, and volunteers as a communicator with an environmental organization, in addition to presenting programs on genealogy topics. So I will hand it over to Sandy. And what we'd like you to do is put your questions in the chat box, if you could, and Sandy will answer them at the end of the presentation. And there will also be time for live questions. And we'll try to start ending the presentation at about 3:15. So I will hand it over to Sandy. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for that introduction. And welcome to everybody from wherever you are. Make sure you put it in the chat. We love to know where people are signing in from. I think I have some friends and family on here also. So I'm glad to see you all on this absolutely gorgeous day in New Jersey. So that might have kept some people away who want to go outside. So as Karen said, my program is called Finding Family Dead or Alive, and I actually love finding living people. So that's more my goal, although I also do my family tree. So I'm going to start out first talking about what you know. Most of us have questions about our roots, even if we didn't research or aren't interested in researching. Most of us have at least a vague idea of where our families originated. Many of us have a basic family tree going back a couple of generations, hopefully to your grandparents. But some of us have very little knowledge of our family history beyond our own parents. So I'm going to do a little quiz. And when I do this in person, I ask people to raise their hands. I can't see all of you, but why don't you play along, raise your hand when you know the answer to a question, and keep it up as we go on. And we'll see how many hands remain raised. We won't really know because I can't see you, but try it. So do you know when and where your mother and father were born? I'm going to guess that's pretty much 100%. Do you know what your mother's maiden name was? Do you know what are or were, most of us it would be were, your grandparents' names, birthdays, and birthplaces? What were your grandmother's maiden names? Now it's getting a little harder. What were your great-grandparents' names and birthplaces, including all the maiden names of the great-grandparents? What were your grandparents' siblings' names? Those would have been your great aunts and uncles. And what were your great-grandparents' siblings' names? Aha, that gets really hard. And it sounds like, why do I need to know that? But it really can help when you're doing family research. So my own family tree was once very bare, just like this, prior to 1997. As Karen said in the introduction, my mother was adopted. She lost her adoptive father when she was 15 after coming here. Talk about that. And her mother died when I was 7. She had no brothers or sisters. My father lost almost his entire family in the Holocaust, save for elderly relatives who had come here earlier in the century. And he had no siblings either. So I had no cousins, consequently, and no aunts or uncles. I had a great aunt who was sort of like a grandmother to me. But when my friends on weekends would say, I'm going to my cousin's this weekend, I would always feel kind of left out. It definitely affected me. So now this is what my tree looks like if you were to draw a picture of a tree. And believe me, it is full and growing. So why do we search? Well, most of us are interested in knowing who we are. And there are a lot of aspects that go into that, not just DNA, but also family trees, history, where people were in the world. So who am I has a lot of different components. So since 1997, besides finding, my mother's biological maternal and paternal families, I've found my father's first cousins who were hidden by nuns during World War II, my father's best friend from Germany who was in Australia, who he hadn't seen since 1939, found my dad's long lost second cousins here in the US and in Israel, and descendants of a previously unknown brother of my paternal great grandmother. That sounds a little complicated, but it's really interesting and has to do with DNA. I've also found my family written about in books that you can actually buy on Amazon. I'm going to show you one of them today. So, how did I do this? And I'm going to tell you over and over how I did this because I want you to see the different components of doing searching if you haven't done it before. So I used internet resources even as far back as 1990, the end of 96. I also, and among them were jewishgen.org. I think I'm a very early member of that. Federal government databases, the US Holocaust Museum, quite a few other organizations. I had documents that I had found that I had, or I found online or through archives. And I sought advice and information from a bunch of different organizations, including the Mormon Church, which is very well known for its record keeping genealogy around the world. There were early internet groups. There was an archive in Germany. I'll talk about that. German friends who could translate here in this country, and people, total strangers, I met online. And I kind of like to call history of the world mega history, and the history that we do when we search for our family or create a tree, micro history. They're both very, very connected. Our lives are very connected to what's going on in the world, whether it's war, famine, persecution, anything. All those are historic parts of history, what we read about and learn about in school, but micro history is our own personal history. So, how did history affect my family? Well, my mother, Marion Buckwalter Hahn, was born in Stockelsdorf, Germany in 1928. She was adopted in 1932 by Hermann and Johanna Buckwalter of Bendorf, which is a little cute little town on the Rhine, right across the river from Koblenz. They escaped Germany in 1939, and in that photo on the right is my mom on the ship. She told me she was very seasick the whole ride, and her two adoptive parents, Johanna Buckwalter and her father Herman. Um, they settled in Washington Heights, where a lot of German Jews settled at that time in history. And she married my dad, Ludwig Hahn, who was also a German Jewish refugee of the Holocaust in 1948. Believe it or not, she did not know she was adopted. And she only found out in her late teens when she needed to become a citizen. She wasn't yet a citizen, even though she'd come in 39. She wrote to Germany for her original birth certificate, and they sent her back birth certificate, which I'll show you, with another mother's name on it. And she was in shock. I have to say, my mother was traumatized for the rest of her life by learning this, and she never told her mother that she knew. So she lost the opportunity to find out any more. She acquired her birth certificates that her mother had. In other words, the one they changed, her adoption birth certificate, and all of her adoption papers when her mother died in 1957. And my mom died in 1991. The photo on the lower right is a cute photo of my parents. I guess they were either courting or they were just married. So I'm guessing it was around 1948 or 49, definitely before I was born. So, how did I search for my mother's biological family? What did I need to do? And if you're searching, these are good steps to follow. So, first, I started with what did I already know? Well, I knew my mother's stories, but stories can be wrong. But I knew them. There weren't many because, of course, she didn't know much about her own history. I had clues in the documents that she had given me. What did I need to find out? I needed to find out if the family survived the Holocaust. That was absolutely number one thing, because if they hadn't, at that time, I don't know what I would have done. I didn't know how to look for records. So I needed to find out whether they survived. If they did survive, did they emigrate? And I have to say, I didn't have a very expansive understanding of emigration. And the only place I thought they might have come was the US. But they could have gone to so many other places if you've heard about Jewish immigration during the 30s. What clues could my mother's documents offer? Well, they actually had dates, names, and locations. And I was really fortunate to have this. Who could help me? I needed a friend who spoke German and could translate documents. And I found someone at the place I was working at the time, which was New Jersey Network. And I needed to connect with people that I met online who I didn't know. What resources were available? Well, I needed to look into what I could find in Germany, in the US, online, and as well as organizations. So I needed to find clues in the documents. So this is one of the documents that my mother had in her possession, which was her original birth certificate. And this was amended, I guess, a few years later, but not the basic information. And it says that her place of birth was a little town called Stockelsdorf, way up north in northern Germany, almost on the Baltic. Do you know Germany at all? It's near Lubeck. What was my grandmother's name? Well, it was Elsa Marie Sophie Gobel. Was she Jewish? My mom wasn't sure. She didn't know any Jews named Marie, and she didn't know any Jews who had so many middle names. And then people started telling her, oh, she must have been Catholic, because Catholics get like another middle name when they have a communion or a confirmation. So we didn't know whether she was Jewish or not. And this also was something that freaked my mother out. It also said that her mother, Elsie or Elsa, was unmarried. So this was, of course, part of the information that shocked my mother. It said the name of the midwife on here, and it also says the name of the woman whose house my mother was born in. So if you look at this birth certificate in depth, you see that something very important is missing. And an important piece of information is who was the father. And it turns out that he's missing from all the documents. At least his name is missing from all the documents. So that was another task for another time. So I started seeking help from people. And in 96, there wasn't any social media like Facebook, but they had something called user groups, which were similar to what Facebook groups are now. And they offered connections to people that shared interests on certain topics, like genealogy. And it was like Facebook, but not any fancy graphics or names, pictures, or anything like that. There was nothing. It was just text on a screen that you could scroll through. So I put out a message. I would call it sending an email to cyberspace. I didn't know any better. And I put it on a German genealogy Facebook group. And I was very vague. And I was vague all the time in my communications because I didn't know how people regarded adoption. And I would just say, I'm looking for family of my mother, and here's what I have. I used the information I already had in her documents. So one of the first people to answer me was a young man named Christian Cole. He didn't live in northern Germany, but he was from Hamburg. And Hamburg, it turned out, was actually where my grandmother's family lived. And that's in one of the other documents that I had. So he was willing to help me. Then I also found an internet site, a website for Stockelsdorf. And it was it was in English, which was very helpful to me. And it was owned by or run by someone named Jan Meinke, who was studying here in the US for his doctorate. And he was from Stockelsdorf. So he connected me with his father, who kind of was a little bit of an amateur historian in their town in Stockelsdorf. So as you can see from the photograph, I actually got to meet Wolfgang, who's on the left, and Christian in 2000 when I traveled to Germany for the first time. I'm still very much in touch with Christian. He's come here a number of times and stayed at my house, and I saw him last May when I was in Germany again. So we've stayed in touch, and he's been an enormous help to me. It was also suggested to me to seek help from the Family History Center run by the Church of Latter-day, I don't know the whole name of it, but the Mormon Church in East Brunswick. And these are centers where you could go to get genealogical information that they kept in Salt Lake City and still keep in Salt Lake City. And you had to order the records then. You didn't get to see them on the internet. So you ordered microfilm and whatever. Anyway, the reason I went there was someone suggested in my question of whether the Gobble family was Jewish or not, that I should look up the German minority census of 1938. And this was when the German Nazi government decided they would count everyone in Germany who wasn't Aryan, who wasn't German, as they put it. And this included, of course, all the Jews, but it also included Spaniards, Italians, Black people, anyone that wasn't German. So I went there and I had to order this census, and it came back, I think, on microfiche. And I ordered it for the city of Hamburg. It came back, and there were no Gobbles on it. Absolutely no one from the family. All the names that I had at that point were only just a few. I had my grandmother's name at that point, and I had her parents' names. They were not on the census. So what did that mean? Did that mean they weren't Jewish? Did it mean they had left? This was before the war. This was before the final solution. So I figured they would still be alive if they were, and they'd be on this census if they lived in Hamburg. So they weren't there. So that was kind of a dead end. So what do you do when you reach a dead end, when you're doing research or when you're driving and you hit a dead end? You turn around and you go another way and you find another way out. So I was looking for more clues. What could help me get to the next step? Well, I had this document among my mother's adoption papers. It's an affidavit that was talks about the citizenship of the Gobble family. I'm sorry, it was probably written by a lawyer. So this was necessary. This is talking about the Gobble family becoming citizens, something I never would have known had I not gotten these records. So it turns out they were from Poland, and they had, I learned this later, they had come to Hamburg probably in the 1890s from Eastern Europe. And my great grandparents were, if you can read it, Joseph Gobble and his wife, whose name was Bashi Brindle. She was known as Brancha by the family. And he was clearly from Poland, from a town called Lubachov, small city. She was also from Poland. It doesn't say that, but it gives her maiden name, and that's an important aspect of family research. And it gives a date that they actually became German citizens, which was April 6th, 1920. Now, the reason this is important is that when you're born in Germany, if your family parents are not German citizens, you are not automatically a citizen, just like you would be in the US. They don't have birthright citizenship. So the parents, the Gobble parents, Joseph and Brancha, had to become citizens before their children could become citizens. And the other thing we learned from this document, which I should have mentioned, is that my grandmother, who's mentioned, let me see, I don't know if you can see my pointer, Elsa Marie Sophie, was the youngest of 9 children. They had 9 kinder, and the last one was Elsa Marie Sophie. So I learned something really important from this document also. But most important was the fact that the family had to become citizens. And I suppose my mother had to be a citizen for her to have an adoption in Germany. I'm trying to see, I don't think the date of this document or when, actually it says it's 1920. So this was proof that they became citizens. So Christian told me that I should take this document and send it to the State Archive in Hamburg. because they might have more additional records about the family. And he said, write in English and they'll write back to you in German. So I wrote to them in English, sent them a copy of this document. They wrote me back, and this is still in the days of snail mail. So they wrote me back and they said, we have documents, we have information, but you have to pay for it. So I wrote them back very quickly. This is all taking place probably in January of 97. I wrote them back very quickly, and I said, I'll pay anything you want. Well, P.S. It wound up costing me $27 for 100 pages of documents on microfilm. And the documents stretched from, I think, the 1890s right until this one in 1933. And the reason they had this was because the Gobble family were aliens, and they kept a paper trail on them. And they had the names in this document, which was a priceless document, the names, birth dates, actual birth dates, and the towns everywhere each person in the family was born. So it's the parents here, Joseph and Brantje, or Bashi Brindle, and then all 9 of their children. And here's my grandmother. And guess what? Today would be her 115th birthday. March 3rd, 1909, she was born. When I saw this, it was incredible, because this meant I could now start to look for all these people. So that was an incredible document to find. So the next thing I wanted to do was start looking for all those children of the family. So we're 1990s. There's a possibility some of them are still alive, maybe even my grandmother. So in genealogy, usually a rule is that you should go from the known to the unknown, not to just shoot out in the dark and, just start looking at different countries or whatever. Like, if I had gone to Polish records, I wouldn't really know where to look. Sometimes, though, I believe it's okay to break the rules if you have the time and the desire, and you might actually find something. So I decided that my next step would be trying to find those children of the Gobbles, including my grandmother. And where do I look? Because I thought, well, maybe they came to America. So I'm going to try to find them. And what's the best place to look? Well, if they died, I would look in the Social Security Death Index. And in that year, 1997, the Social Security Death Index was just coming online, and it was controversial. And there were always threats that it would be taken offline because people thought it violated privacy of even of dead people, but also their living relatives. It gave these, and still gives, the Social Security number. So there was some concern about it. So I quickly was going online, and it was always going down. I was like a nervous wreck. And I'm looking for the children. So one of the complications here was that there were 2 sons and 7 daughters. So of course, you know what that means. It means that their names have changed, and I didn't have the married names. So I'm starting to look for the sons. And the sons were named Martin Max Gobble and Julius Gobble. So I start looking for them, and I have no luck with them. And what I'm looking for is a birthday match. So I have no luck with Julius. He's nowhere to be found. So I decide to start looking for Martin Max Gobble. And I'm looking for a birthday that approximates, that is actually his birthday in the records, of March 25th, 1899. I found nothing really close. I found a lot of Martin Gobbles, but I didn't find anyone with a birthday remotely close. But so then I said, well, let me look for Max, because in those 100 documents that I had that I'd been sent from Germany, he is always referred to as Max. So I start looking for Max, and I come up with this match, as you can see highlighted, of a Max Gobble who was born March 27th, 1899, 2 days after the birth date I had. I thought, well, that's pretty close. But what really got me was his last residence of West Orange, New Jersey. And I said, oh my goodness, well, this bears looking into. So I decided that I would go to the one newspaper that I was certain would have a West Orange residence obituary, and that was the Newark Star Ledger. And I did. I had to go to the Woodbridge Public Library because my library didn't have their microfilm. And I started going through the microfilm. If anyone ever used microfilm, you had to turn that wheel to move the pages, going through it, looking for all the obituaries at the end of August of 1988. And I come up with this obituary for Martin Gobble. But then in the first line, it says Martin Max Gobble. And I read on and I noticed that he he was from Germany and he still had five sisters living when he died in August 1988. Of course, it's 9 years later. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I literally began screaming in the library because I knew that I had found my mother's uncle, my mother's biological uncle, her mother's brother in New Jersey, of all places. I'm a native born New Yorker. My parents never lived in New Jersey. And I never had any family in New Jersey other than my own immediate family. So that was amazing. Wait, I'm not going to show you that yet. So the funeral home, some of you in New Jersey might have heard of it, is Menorah Chapels in Millburn, very well known. I contacted them and I told them I was looking for Mrs. Barbara Attar, the survivor of Martin Max Gobble. I couldn't find her in any other resources, phone books or internet, and the internet wasn't quite as developed then. So I had nothing on her. So they said, well, you'll have to send us a letter because we're not going to give out, any information about her. She thought I was a crazy relative or whatever. So I wrote a letter. I was vague. I said, I think we're related through your father. I figured with 9 kids in the family, that might not be too far-fetched. And I put it in an envelope and I wrote Mrs. Barbara Attar, put a stamp on it, and I put my return address in it. Put it in a big envelope with a note to the funeral home. Please send this to Mrs. Attar. So they sent it off to her. Well, guess what? She had moved. And the post office sent the letter back to me. And they said, I have to put more postage on it. And it gave me her new address. And her new address was exactly 5 miles from my house. At that time, she lived in Helmetta in a condo. I was literally in shock at this point. So I didn't have her number. I wrote her another letter. This time I said, I think we're related through your father. Here's my rabbi's name and number in case you need a reference. So I sent it to her. And a few days later, I came home from work. I'd given her my phone number, and there was a message on my voicemail. And I hear this lovely woman's voice, and she said, "Hi, I was so excited to receive your letter. I'm so excited to meet a new cousin." And then she ends it with, "Bye, cuz." And I was like in total shock, like someone calling me cousin. It turns out we're first cousins once removed. She's my mother's first cousin. And I think it was either that night or the next night, I went to her house, to her condo, and I met Barbara Attar, Barbara Gobble Attar, who's will be known from now on in this program as BB. BB was my mother's first cousin, or my mother was her first cousin. She was born and raised in West Orange, and she was just 5 miles away. And here we are meeting that night. I'm holding a photo of her father, and she's holding the very first photo I ever saw of Elsie. And here's that photo of Elsie taken after the war, shortly after she came to the US. And in the set, this is my mother. And believe it or not, in almost every photograph I have of them, they posed the same way. My mother always posed standing up with her hands on her hip. And you'll see some other photos of Elsie. So Elsie was a brunette like my mom, but she became a bleached blonde after the war. And they looked so much alike, which was really important to me because my mother went through my life all after she told me she was adopted, always asking, who do I look like? Who do you look like? And to see that she looked just like her mother was quite amazing. Then the next amazing thing that happened was June 28th, 1997, my mother's birthday. She had been gone already 6 years at that point, but she would have been her 79 that day. And it just so happened on that day, a whole bunch of people converged in New Jersey, and they all came to my house. And I'm going to show you who they are. Sitting here, this is me. Sitting next to me is Elsie's sister, Lutta, her older sister, born in 1904. She actually lived till she was 105. This is cousin Bibi. This is my dad. This is his significant other. He came up from Florida. This is Lotta's daughter, Tirza, who's from Israel. This is Lotta's daughter, son, Mike. Their daughter might be actually on the program with us. And this is my daughter, my nephew, my son, my husband, and my niece. And somehow something cosmic happened, and we all were together on my mother's birthday. So I started to learn about Elsie. So Elsie married Gunther Hamburger on November 7th, 1938. He was from Breslau. They fled Germany the day of Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938. And they ended up in Manila. And they ended up spending World War II living under the Japanese, because the Japanese invaded about a day or two after Pearl Harbor, and they took over the Philippines. Elsie was very badly injured, and her husband was killed in the Battle of Manila that happened in 1945. It started in January. I think he was killed in February. She was injured. She finally made it to California in 1946, believe it or not, to Beverly Hills, where one of her sisters had emigrated. And she remarried a man named Manny Fredkin, who was a widower. He had 4 children. And she died in Phoenix in 1995, where one of her stepdaughters lived. And the photo on the top right is Elsie on the beach in Manila in 1941. And on the bottom is Elsie with her sister Nellie, who was one of the 2 remaining sisters when I found the family. And so I got to meet her. This was taken in New York City. Nellie lived in Lincoln Center Towers at the time, and I did get to visit her. And this is Elsie visiting from California. She's wearing a white mink stole, and I'm proud to say that I own that white mink stole, and I wore it to my daughter's wedding. Here's another set of photographs where my brother and I agreed that my mom and her mother looked so stunningly alike. They had the exact same nose, just so similar. It was amazing. I think these pictures may have been taken the same year, actually. And there are more family that Bibi introduced me to. This is Nellie, the sister that lived in New York. These 3 sisters, Elsie's first cousins, are sadly not with us anymore. Another first cousin isn't here. This is Bibi's son. And this cousin, Ruth Goldstein, cousin of my grandmother, is still with us. She just turned 96. And we're very much in touch, and I love her dearly. So next adventure for me, now that I found family, and they embraced me. My mother always said if she looked for her mother would reject her. The family embraced me. I've just been a missing cousin to them. That's all. I was lost for 70 years, my mother. So the next question I had was, who was my mother's father? He's alluded to in a document that I'm going to show you, but again, no name. So what did I already know? So interestingly, after my mother confessed to me that she was adopted, she always said to me, he was an American. It was like the strangest thing. My father and I, we never could figure out how she knew this. She also told me his last name. So we suspect she had a document that she destroyed. We don't know. It was lost. We never saw it. So I remembered, though, kind of vaguely, if you remember these things when you learn them very young, that his name sounded kind of like Onstedt, but it wasn't on any document. So that day that I had that family reunion, I sat across from Lutta and I said, what can you tell me about my mother's father? And the first words out of her mouth, I swear, were, he was an American. And I looked at her and I said, oh my goodness, that's what my mother always said, but how so? Well, he was actually naturalized. And actually, he was from a town that's now in Ukraine. So he was a naturalized American. And his last name was Altstetter. Well, doesn't that sound like Onstedt to you? it did to me. And she wrote it down. And I, of course, was now set for my next search. So, what did I have in my possession that could help me? So, I had a document that was signed by a woman named Anna Shore, and she talks all about what a good family my mother's father was from. And how did she know this? Well, she knew it because my mother was his father's sister, something, but she never says the name. She never says her mother's name. Of course, the mother's last name is not, was not the same name as Anna's name. And this letter written in Hamburg, I'm guessing again, it was necessary for my mother's adoption. It's dated 1930, so my mother's already going on or already is 2 years old. Um, so it was interesting that this was needed. So his name is never mentioned. So I have this information and I'm trying to figure out like these relationships and I'm like crazy. So BB and I at that point, now it's nearing the end of 1997, we decide to go to Israel. The reason we went to Israel is it turned out that a lot of the Gobble family hadn't come to the US. They had actually gone to Palestine in the 30s. And that's why they weren't in that census from 1938. So never say never that you're not going to solve something. So my new cousin Bibi and I go to Israel, and I'm advised by a stranger on the internet who I shared this document with that we should go and visit this woman named Ani Shore on a kibbutz. Ani Shore is the daughter-in-law of that lady, Anna Shore, who wrote that document. So she's related closely. And as you can see, she was already elderly. I think she was in her 80s. So we went to the kibbutz among the many stops we made in Israel. And we visited Ani, who only spoke German or Hebrew, but fortunately, Bibi, who had lived in Israel for a while, spoke fluent Hebrew. And Ani Shore, we'd sort of tell her the story, and she says, I seem to remember that there was some kind of a family scandal at one time, but I don't know much about it. She goes in another room and comes back with an envelope, and she says, when you get back to the US, contact this woman. So the woman's name on the envelope was Anne Levine, and she's in Worcester, Massachusetts. A completely new name to me. I don't know. So we talk a few times. I had no idea at the time she was 93. I sent her pictures of my mother. She gets on the phone when I talked to her. She said, oh, your mother looked just like my sister. And I'm thinking, maybe my mother was her sister. I don't know this. And we're talking and we hang up. Then the next time we talk, she tells me she's not feeling well and she needs to get off the phone. And I said, well, before you get off the phone, please, what was your maiden name? She said it was Altstetter. And I thought, now how could we be related? I mean, we're definitely related. So I call back again and I get her daughter on the phone. And it turns out that this lady, Anne, was ill and she died not long after that. And her daughter got on the phone with me and she said, oh, we saw your letter and we saw your pictures of your mother and your story. And we are certain that our grandfather, Moritz Altstetter, was your mother's father. And that's what they told me. And I said, well, why are you so certain of this? So it turns out Moritz Altstetter, they told me, was not very faithful to his wife. And in fact, he had died in a brothel of a heart attack in 1946. So they kind of had this idea that their grandfather, had probably fathered my mother when he took his business trips to Germany and he visited his family, Mrs. Shore, in Hamburg. And that's how I found that connection between the families. So here I am meeting some of Moritz's grandchildren, his granddaughter, his two granddaughters. This one, Rosemary, lives in Canada, and Myrna now lives in Florida. So I'm again meeting living family. So I decided, being the investigative reporter that I was, I'm never satisfied unless I have documentation in some way. And by 2017, 20 years later, everyone's doing DNA, or not everyone, but a lot of people are starting to do their DNA. So I decided that this might be the only way I'm going to figure out whether Moritz was really my mother's father, because I knew there had to be a very strong DNA match for with someone who had been his other grandchild in order for us to be that closely related. So I asked Stephen Altstetter, who's one of the other grandchildren of Moritz, if he would please do an ancestry test. And he did. And it comes back in 2017, it comes back and we are cousins, but we are not half first cousins, which would mean we shared a grandfather. We're just maybe third cousins. So I said, 20 years later, we just found out that Moritz was not my mother's father. So what am I going to do? Well, I start looking at that letter again, and I build a little tree. And here's Anna, actually Anna Shore, the one who wrote that letter about my mother's father. And I find out her mother was Reisel Altstetter. And according to her letter, Reisel should have been my mother's grandfather's brother, not my mother's father's, excuse me, sister. So here is the grandfather, whose name I don't yet know. And here's her daughter. And over here is Elsie. And here's the man that fathered my mother. And here's my mother. So now we're building a tree. And that's something that you're advised to do when you're doing DNA. So I need to find proof that Reisel's last name was Altstetter, because that also was a big part of the connection. And who came to the rescue but Christian, again, my friend, my young friend, who found this birth record, excuse me, marital record for Reisel Altstetter. And the very funny thing about this record is that look how old she and her husband were when they got married, 64 and 58. And the reason is they're having a civil wedding late in life. Probably for some reason, the government asked them to do so, but they had really been married for many years in a Jewish ceremony. But luckily, this record was available. So now I know that Reisel was married to Anna Shore's father. So I'm putting all of these things together. So now I know that this is an Altstetter. So we're getting closer. I just want to explain that the Altstetter original spelling you'll see was Adter with an umlaut, and the family that I'm related to changed it to Edter. So that was something important to know, that names are changed a lot. So we have a new narrative now. Was my mother actually the daughter of Moritz's nephew? And could that person have been closer in age to my grandmother? And how was Moritz involved? I have theories about that. I also had a smoking gun that I found. I found a ship manifest from October 1927 showing another Altstetter named Irving coming home from Germany. Well, October 1927 was when my mother should have been conceived. So that was interesting. Then I find someone, so I got to keep going with this. So I find another person from that family on Ancestry who has a family tree. It's actually her daughter. And her daughter puts me in touch with her. Her name is Beverly S. She's in Edmonton, Canada, from that branch of the family that went to Canada. We connected and I asked her to do a DNA test. Turns out, I know from her tree that she's the granddaughter of Moritz's nephew, Louis Altstetter. So that relationship we know. And she agrees to test with Ancestry in 2017. By the way, she knows nothing about Louis, nothing. She doesn't know that he has siblings. So the Ancestry DNA comes back, and Beverly and I are really closely related. We're actually second cousins, meaning our grandparents were siblings. So her grandfather had a brother. So who was that brother? We're going to put all that together. So here's our DNA match. Turned out that Louis had a brother who'd immigrated to the US as a teenager from Jabarj in Galicia, which is now Ukraine. And he lived in New York. And that was Irving. And that's the person who's on that ship manifest coming back from Germany. The Altstetter family would go back and forth to Germany for business reasons and to travel to visit their families. And their family was in Hamburg. last year, almost exactly a year ago, I finally met Beverly for the first time in Arizona, where she escapes from the Canadian winters. So here we are meeting, and she might be on today. I hope she is. Um, she might be watching. So what did I find out when I start putting the whole family came into focus? I find out that Irving Alstetter is my biological grandfather. Louis Alstetter is Irving's brother, and down here is Beverly. And Irving is my grandfather. Here's my mother, and here's me. Uh, Louis and Irving are the sons of Naphtali. It took me a while to find that out. Whereas grandfather Alstetter. Rizel was a sister of both Naphtali and Moritz, and they had a whole lot of siblings in that family. And that's one of the reasons also it was so hard. There are lots of Alstetter men. It was hard to find out. And Rizel was the mother of Anna Shore, who was the author of that adoption affidavit. So now I want to find out if my grandfather had other children that after he came back to America. And could I have half first cousins, which is what I was looking for all along. So this time I tested with 23andMe in September of 2017. And there were no matches because there had been no matches on Ancestry that were good. I was seeking a half first cousin match, 6.25% of our DNA in that range. The results arrived in October, and I had a top match of 5.63, which is in the ballpark, with a woman in California whose grandfather was Irving. And I knew some of this because it was another person in the Alstetter family, not named Alstetter, who has a whole family tree on Ancestry. So I was starting to learn more, and I had been in touch with him. And you'll learn why that's so ironic. So in 2018, Irving's grandson, Greg, he finally tested with 23andMe. And Greg and I have been in touch already for a couple of years at this point. Turns out he is my half first cousin. He and I share nearly 7%, and he and my brother share nearly 8%. And now we know for sure that Irving Alstetter, who lived from 1898 to 61, was my mother's father. And here's his photo. It's the only photo I have. He did get married. He and his wife had 2 daughters, and one daughter is Greg's mother, and he's one of 4 children. And I'm in touch with Greg. I'm not really in touch with any of the other Alstetter relatives. It's not the same relationship as I have with my grandmother's family. So here Greg and I meeting for the very first time in New York in 2018. And if you saw pictures of me when I was 12, I looked just like him, I swear. So that's how I found my mother's family. And I'm just going to tell you 3 anecdotes about my dad's family. He was a Holocaust survivor. He actually was in a concentration camp after Kristallnacht. And after that, his parents sent him to England on the Kindertransport. He never saw them again. And everyone who was left behind in Germany was murdered. He was able to get to America in 1941, where he had an aunt. And 2 years later, he joined the army. He was naturalized an American citizen and went overseas and fought actually, he was a mechanic on the front lines in Egypt and Italy. His parents were deported and murdered. And he died only, I guess it's 7 years ago this year at the age of 94. And here's his photo on the right in Anzio during World War II. And at the bottom, this is one of the last photos I have of my dad. He's with my 2 granddaughters who are now 9 and 11. And he was just overjoyed to be able to be with them in Florida. So Dad never talked about his family to me. If I engaged him in any conversations about family heritage, he would shut me down. And this is very typical of Holocaust survivors. So whenever he would start to open up, it was always a surprise. So around 2000, now I had this reputation as the great, genealogist in the family. He asked me if I'd find these lost cousins of his who were much younger than him and had been saved by nuns and other organizations in France. during World War II. He never saw them again. He never talked about it. I never even heard of them. He asked me to find them. So again, this is how you start off. What are their names, their birth years, their parents' names, birthday, any factual information he could provide. I started to look at these in these resources, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, and the internet. Turned out that one of the children, named Minnie, had placed a whole testimony about the family and how they were saved with the museum. She had registered, and I found her email address on the internet and wrote to her. She was in Massachusetts, but here we go. Her sister lived in Metuchen. So very quickly, and when Minnie visited, we were able to have a little reunion. And of course, my dad was able to talk to them on the phone, and he actually got to meet their brother who lives in California. So he was really happy, stayed a little bit in touch with them over the years. He wasn't good at that. And I connected him with that. So then a few years later, he comes up to me again with a story I had never heard. And that was that he had two very good friends from his town who went with him to England and then got sent to Australia. He never mentioned this. Could you please find my friends, Heinz and Walter? So again, I asked him for everything he could remember about them, including their parents' names. And I searched the internet, just looking up Kindertransport in Australia. So by now the internet's getting a little better. It's like 2003. And I found these organizations and I wrote to them. And most of the time they write back and say, well, we don't have any information. But all you need is one person to do one thing and it can just open the door. So this one woman said to me, I don't have any information, but I'm going to put your announcement into the Jewish newspaper. So she put it in the newspaper that I was looking for Heinz and Walter Hirsch, who were brothers from Bergen, Germany, born in 1923 and 24, etc. Somebody who knew Heinz, who's now known as Henry, saw this. When he saw Henry the next time, he said, somebody's looking for you. And that's how I reconnected my father and his best friend. His brother had unfortunately died, but Henry came to Florida in 2003. And my biggest regret is I didn't get this in the newspapers. And they had a reunion and they just restarted their family, their friendship, like two little boys, and started sending each other jokes by email. And my dad died in 2017. Henry died maybe 3 years later. And we kept in touch over the years after my father died. And it was just amazing. And I was so glad that I was able to reunite them. So I asked my dad in 2017, while I was still looking for my mother's father, to do a DNA test. Little did I know in February 2017 that he only was going to be around for another month. And we had no idea. But he wasn't well, but we really had no idea. But he agreed to do it. And I said to my brother who took the test to him down in Florida, I said, tell dad, we're looking for mom's father, but maybe we'll find some cousins. And my father looked at my brother and he says, they're all dead. And, what did I know? Everyone we knew, was older than my father. And then, well, the others had died in the Holocaust. So I just said, oh, okay, that's what he believes. Well, we start immediately when his DNA came back, finding family. Sadly, the results arrived after he passed away. Since then, I have found so many cousins. I've built out his family tree. It's really quite incredible. And I've reconnected with people. This is my dad's second cousin, who he would have known. And this man thinks he was at my parents' wedding. We haven't been able to make sure that the little boy in the pictures is him because it's not a great view, but he thinks he was at their wedding in 1948. And it's very possible because his aunt and uncle were the ones who walked my dad down the aisle. And these are more cousins of my dad that I met in New Jersey when they were here for a wedding. We just look for opportunities. And then the most recent thing, and I'll be closing soon, that I found about my dad is what happened to him in England. Where was he in England? I had wondered about this for years. Again, he just did not talk about it. The only thing he ever told me was he remembered the bombing and that he was in Manchester. So I started writing to different organizations, including the Manchester Jewish Museum. And last year in the spring, I wrote to an archivist at the Jewish Museum and told, my father's story, what information I had, all the documents that I had of my dad's. And again, she was one person out of many who would basically say, we have no information. She decided to go and look up the census for that part of the world of 1939 in England, rather, UK census. And she came up with my father's name, living in a hostel in Stockport that was run by a Viennese social worker named Marianne Prager. And she told me that actually that hostel is the subject. I don't know if you can see this. It might be blurred, but that hostel is the subject of a whole chapter in this book called Jews and Other Foreigners. I'm trying to get it in focus. Jews and Other Foreigners, Manchester and the Rescue of the Victims of European Fascism. And this chapter in the book is titled The Most Difficult Boys to Handle, Refugees at the Stockport Hostel 1939 to 40. And my dad was one of them, and his last name is in there. And one of my theories was proved true. He trained as a mechanic in England while he was in that hostel, and that's what he did when he was in the army. So I'm still not satisfied. Now I know where he was, and I start looking up information about this social worker, Marianne Prager. And it turned out that she's someone of quite someone renowned in the UK. And there was a whole article about her in a British social work journal in 2022, just 2 years ago. And I contacted the author who wrote in the article that she interviewed Marianne's nephew. And I contacted her and I said, do you think you could put me in touch with the nephew? And she did immediately. So I reached out to him. His name is David. And I said, is there any chance you might have any photographs from the hostel from your aunt? Marianne was his aunt. He said, well, I'll look and I'll see what I can find. And I said, I will recognize my father instantly if you do. And here's what he found. As soon as I saw this photo, this is a photo of the photo. And you can see, I don't know if you can see them. Well, the little photo corners are on there. It was beautifully preserved on a page in her photo album. And I thought this looked like it was taken in England. And David said, oh, no, that's not what Stockport looked like. And he said, I think that was taken in the US. And then I looked at it more closely and I realized that it looked like it was taken at my great aunt's house, my Tanta Regina's house, where I spent lots of time growing up. That's the woman who brought my father to America. And I pulled out a Google Street View of the address and I matched up the windows and the roof lines. And sure enough, it was taken in front of Tanta's house, probably in the spring of 41. And I'm guessing that my dad sent the photo to Marianne to let her know that he was okay. They had probably worked out some, she must have said, please, get in touch with me when you get to America. And there's my dad, 1941, sending his news to Marianne. Unfortunately, he didn't write on the back of it, and David doesn't have any other letters or anything, but that's my dad. So I ask you, after listening to me, what do you want to find? And, you should start identifying your own goals. I know we have at least one person here who's new to genealogy. So start identifying your goals. Do you want to find living relatives? Do you want to create a tree? Do you want to learn about your family's journey from the old country? Collect everything you have, documents, address books, photos, birth certificates. I still kick myself that I threw out my mother's address book. It had every adoptive family, extended family's name and address in it. And and my father's family as well. I don't have it anymore. Talk to other relatives before it's too late. Everyone, including your own siblings. They may have heard things that you didn't know. Try to find out, try to get what you can. It was very hard, as I said, with my father. But it's so important to do that. Visit graves, get translations of gravestones, and you can do that on Facebook very easily. Find what you can, the easiest stuff first, the low-hanging fruit. Ask for help. Don't ever be afraid to ask for help from pretty much anyone. I'm never afraid to ask for help. Join genealogy and DNA focus groups on Facebook. And here are some tips for asking for help. If you go on Facebook, if you write a letter to an organization, if you go on Jewish Gen, another place to ask questions, I find that a lot of people don't follow some simple rules. And if you do, you're going to get help more easily, and you're going to really inform people of what you're looking for in a more concise way. So first, include your specific question in the first or second sentence. That's really important. Include everything you already know that's related to your question, such as the names, dates, locations. Be very specific, not vague. Include the documents you already have, such as a census, a marriage certificate, a birth certificate, a ship manifest. Many people will say, they're looking for so-and-so from this city, and these wonderful people on Facebook will go and find all these documents. And then the person who posted will say, oh, I already have those. So you really have to let people know. Don't use names of living people and sometimes of dead people for privacy reasons. So try to use like a first name and an initial, unless you are specifically looking for a surname. When you're asking for help deciphering a handwritten word, include the entire document, not just the word, because this way people can analyze the handwriting better. Don't ask for help on another person's post. Instead, start your own post. Respond when someone asks you a question about your post. Don't just put a post there and then never respond to questions or when they've helped you. And try to show gratitude for the help you receive. That way people know that they actually helped you. Excuse me. So I definitely recommend joining Facebook groups. Here's a few of them. And look up the town. Like if you're on Facebook, look up the towns that you're searching, because a lot of times those towns have their own groups, towns and cities. So you might even get more that way. And I want to just say that family history is very important to me. This is something I didn't know 30 years ago, when I was, or 25 years ago, when I was starting to search. My family, it turns out, has the BRCA2 mutation. It's very common among Ashkenazi Jews. Only 1 in 40, I shouldn't say only, but 1 in 40 is a very common mutation. My daughter Cheryl died in August 2015 of breast cancer related to the BRCA2 mutation. We didn't know we had it until her diagnosis. Turns out that my mother's cancer is also related to the BRCA mutation, and we didn't know that either. It was a digestive cancer. Then I learned when I found Irving Altstetter that he died at the same age of a similar cancer. And now I know through a record that I just recently got that his mother died of almost the same cancer. So we have a family history, and it's a family history I didn't know about. So it's important to know your risk. I always tell people, don't be afraid to test. Your life and those of your children and other family members, your cousins, your siblings, could be saved with this knowledge. And I'm certain if I'd known this years ago, my daughter would still be alive, because we would have known to take actions that could have saved her, screenings, and other actions that could have saved her. And if you do all these things, and I hope you do, perhaps you'll also find family dead or alive. And that's my presentation. I hope it didn't take too long, but I'm happy to answer your questions. I actually have the chat here, so I'm going to take a look and see. Oh, I
Thank you
see
so
there's
much, Sandy.
BRCA.
I just wanted to thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, and your tenacity and perseverance really paid off. You got a lot of amazing information. So I'm going to stop recording. And then I'll let you just answer the questions, okay? Thank you so
Okay,
much.
terrific. Thank you. I'd love to answer your questions.